was like, yeah, well, the point of classical liberalism was that the left wing were supposed to work, in tandem, but be checks on each other. And he's right. That was the, let's say, the intention. But what has happened is that from the 1930s to the 1990s, the conservatives were relegated as a minority party against the progressive Democrats and the modern Democrats. And the conservatives had no power at the federal government, so they were disrespected. On top of that, the progressive intellectuals and liberals who wanted to fit in with the progressives over time bullied them out of every institution by not inviting them, by not giving them tenure, etc., etc. And so the right wing got castigated out of the academics in the 1940s to 60s. And then the liberals, the ones who are actual classical liberals, got castigated out in the 1970s, 60s to, I think it was like the 50s to 70s. So Paul Godfrey has an interesting interview on this. Like, what happened to the American elite? What shifted? Why they're so ineffective right now? Why don't we see excellence anymore? And he explains the historiography of this. And Newt Gingrich does the same thing in a lot of respects. But he explains that the same thing happened in Britain in the 1830s, where all the conservative intellectuals in the Conservative Party, led by Robert Peel, lost to the liberals on the argument of free trade and getting cheaper grain imported into the country from Ireland, Belgium, and France because their labor was getting too expensive. And their plan was to send as much of the rural workers into the cities to work in factories, right? And the conservatives lost the argument. And Robert Peel said to his second in command, look, you're going to have to answer this debate because I think they're right, and I think I agree with them. So all the conservative intellectuals left and became more liberal, right? Which left a black vacuum in the conservative thought leadership in the West. And this is in England. And this happened in the 1830s and 60s with the Corn Law debates. If you want to look it up, that's what you would look up. And Newt Gingrich said that this was when the British lost their free trade argument. They lost the arguments of protectionism at certain times, being just as, let's say, forceful with our economic policy rather than being free trade all the time. And the conservatives lost that argument. And the only people they had left to lead their party was a conservative intellectual who was known for being like the most degenerate of them. And his name was Benjamin Disraeli. And he used to go travel throughout Europe with his mistress and her husband and write novels. And this guy became the thought leader, and he was a really good conservative thought leader, honestly, he was. And he held the Conservative Party together and became prime minister. But that left and right dynamic died right there for the British. And in America, to me, it died between the 1930s and the 1990s. And when free trade became the normality, that was the end of the conservative, any type of real conservative movement on the right, essentially.
Yeah, I usually appreciate your historical perspective, right? But I think the question that's begging is how do, you live in the West, you're American, how do you guys move forward? What
I don't know, because here's the thing, right? Because,
right?
No, this is extremely hard, though. What I'm trying to explain to you is what you're asking me is extremely hard because I like the ancient.
I'm suggesting is somewhere to start. Right? I'm saying that start internal discussions, right? If the problems within the Asian community, Asians should criticize each other, shame each other, which already happens, right?
Because no, the Koreans are outnumbered. 80% of the Koreans are like.
Well, not just Asians, as in just the Chinese, the Koreans, right, and including the Black community in America. That should be an internal dialogue, and because it is to your detriment if it doesn't change. Because
here's the thing, though. Like, this is a lot more complicated than you understand. Because like the Blacks used to have their upper intellectual class that used to go to specific private high schools or Black-only high schools in Washington, Maryland, Virginia in the 1830s to the 1880s, and they were able to produce upper-class Black elite from the South who were well-educated. And Dunbar High School is one of the examples of these high schools where the best school students from all over. Just real quick. Just try to that, because what you're trying to say is the right wing should rebuild an aristocratic institutional elite class.
That's what I'm saying.
And there has to be. No, well, I'm telling you that there has to be. Otherwise, you're just going to have Peter Zeihan and Neil Ferguson arguing against liberals. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. That all the conservatives have gone into the private sector and have basically abandoned service and duty and going into the institutions. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. They were pushed out and then they accepted it. And for the last, bro, like, I have friends who are in the space who are conservatives, policymakers, and they say that until the 90s, we used to have conservative research that the government used to back their welfare policies and to reduce a lot of it in '94 with Bill Clinton. But since then, since there were no more conservative researchers, now he says that the only research out there are all in left. So you're actually letting the liberals and leftists win by pushing their political power at the government stage, institutional stage, and they're able to push the conservatives out. There's nothing the conservatives can do about it unless.
I was trying to sideline the left-right dichotomy, but since we are really talking about this, I think what's happening, what has happened, is actually rather natural, because as society becomes more affluent, they just demand more, individual liberty, and this is, or you would call it progressivism, and at this stage, I think it's progressivism like going overboard. So this phenomenon, having more liberty of, instead of individual complying to society, you are insisting that society complies, with your self-identification and all that bullshit. This is natural progression of, I think affluent society. That's it.
No, I don't disagree with you, but I'm talking about the particularity of the problems specific to the right wing in America. Yeah.
If this is actually natural and cyclical, right, and that is could also be the downfall of civilizations, and it's natural and cyclical. If it's cyclical, there's nothing you can do, because it's all this the situation right now happens because of cause from before, and that cause you can't change the cause from before, right, and therefore there's no way you can change that, and unless when society totally collapses, and then you hit a hard reset, and we rebuild. So to me, that is cyclical, and there's nothing anyone can do, right? That's just how society would naturally progress.
Well, that's why there's like a dictator that comes along after these democratic societies that offer law and order, and then everybody's like, yes, give me law and order right now, and then everybody wants law and order. Democracy.
Right? And then all these minorities, maybe the Koreans or the blacks, all these minorities, the situation might not be very beneficial for you, under a far right-wing dictator. So before you get there, hopefully, like I said, if you start an internal dialogue, right? Because I think most of the grievances from outside looking in is that the unwillingness or the political inexpediency to even mention certain things, right? Because of PC-ness and so on and so forth. So if that's the case, outsiders cannot criticize you. You must be able to criticize yourself, have an internal dialogue, explore, right, that your own cultural, not retrospective, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, you know what I'm talking.
But China guy, I don't think you understand that the system is technically like an affirmative action system where the left hand doesn't know that the right hand is, that they're connected. Meaning, like, look at Maxine Waters at the head of the Federal Reserve in the Congressional Committee, and she's waving goodbye to Sam Bankman-Fried saying, "I love you, baby." And meanwhile, he got his charges dropped, and now there's photos of him in jail looking like shit. I mean, his parents, they spent all this money and Silicon. Listen, I'm just saying that the corruption in the African American Black caucus and really in Black politics in America is entrenched, and it ain't going away, my nigga.
Well, that's just part of it. I think the whole system is corrupt. Like I say, I use this example all the time. People think of African leaders being corrupt. You think of corruption, you think, African governments. But really, think about it, right? Defense Department of the U.S., trillions unaccounted for. One fucking department, trillions unaccounted for. So normally speaking, the U.S. is probably the most corrupt country in the whole world. Like nominally, if you talk about counting dollars. Right. I think America is so freaking corrupt. It's just that they are great at manufacturing consent and portraying, giving the world a perception that it is not, but in fact it's probably the most corrupt country in the world. I know my Hunter Biden and Burisma and all that crap that's going on. The amount of corruption, I tell you, America is the most corrupt country in the world. So internal dialogue, guys, and it applies to you too, John, since you're Jewish. You know what's happening in Palestine? Dude, it's so damaging to your own people.
That's just such a liberal answer. Like, have debate. Yeah, that's how, like, the conservatives have been debating liberals and lefties since, like, 150 years ago, and they haven't worked shit. So they haven't gotten any of their ideas implemented. It's just, I don't know.
Not debate, I'm talking about internal dialogue. It starts there, because since outsiders kind of criticize you, I mean, if you criticize Jews, then you're anti-Semite, criticize black, and then you're racist bigot. Then the only thing that you can do is criticize yourselves, right? So the more robust internal dialogue should be had.
Yeah, I mean, look, like Tocqueville said that when he came to America in the 1820s and observed people, Americans wouldn't talk about religion and politics with each other so that they could have more customers with each other. They wouldn't offend each other. So that inclination to not offend was there from the beginning. This is just how democracies function, unfortunately. And uh, whoever can take over institutions and the federal government will be the one who influences the culture, the social norms, everything from then on in the future. So I don't know. It's just that most people don't understand this, but the leftists in America do. The liberals kind of do, but the conservatives understand it the least. They just think that if they're active in their local community, then everything will be all right. And this is some conservative liberal, like Burkean kind of philosophy. It's like, well, you can't do anything, so you just go, live on retire to a farm in Maine, and it'll be all right. But I don't know. It's like it's so weird that you make this argument then, because then how do you explain how the leftists have been able to infiltrate the government, get everything they've done, and change social norms over the last 60 years? What? So you're like, hey, I would never put Christian values in the federal government, but I'm okay with liberals putting, gay straight alliances into our schools and like making it to identity activism in schools. That's okay though. That's not a religion. Unironically, it has been a religion in America for like 300-400 years. So we fell for the trap. The word games. They're like, yeah, you can't put religion in church. First of all, that's not even in any of our founding documents. So that idea shouldn't even exist in America, separation of church and state. But enough pro-Jefferson and pro-democracy people just repeated, separation of church and state and democracy so much that everybody thinks we're a democracy. We're not. We're a constitutional republic, with double representation of the people in the Senate and the House, which is still, I don't know, man. Like, a lot of these problems are innate inside liberalism. And the same thing happened in Athens, where all the capable people decided not to participate in the bureaucracy and the institutions of Athenian democracy because it always appealed to the people. So all their best people decided to go into the private sector, make money for them and their family, and not care about anything else. And they swore an oath. The oligarchs of Athens swore an oath that they will never trust the masses again from now on, because all they did was get them into wars outside of Athens in Sicily and Egypt, expanded as an empire to maintain their federal government that was getting bloated, because all the voters in Athens voted in more jobs into the federal bureaucracy, which led to them having half the voters work for the Athenian government at their feet, right? So they're just voting in comfy jobs for themselves, and they can't afford it, so they have to go and expand and become an empire. And this is how democracies and republics always function. French Revolution. As a result, they had Napoleon Bonaparte as a reaction, who was tired of the inefficiency of um, the Council of 500 and the Council of 250. He takes over executive command, and then after him you have 2 decades of Bourbon monarchs, and then 10 years of citizen King John Louis Philippe, and then you go back to the Second French Republic. So even in France, and then you have the Walls with the same thing, where he literally reforms the third or fourth French Republic. So the same thing happens right there again. And yet we're so blind to this process because we believe in democracy so much and republic so much.
Can I interject here real quick and just say that, I do believe that religion can trump politics. And so even if you have a really good historical knowledge and you're totally accurate, I do get the feeling that like you can put all arguments to rest essentially with what I would call transcendental psychological, esoteric, symbolism, meaning that within every clown here on Clown House, there is essentially a luminosity or what you might call a divine spark of creativity or some type of connection to the infinity of the universe. So it's so easy to shame people. And I think that one Christian ethic about, being able to see the log in your own eye or essentially knowing that you're a hypocrite is really a fundamental component of wisdom or psychological understanding. And so when a comedian can be self-deprecating, that is a demonstration of philosophical wisdom. And I would just say that
No, but then some people just do that so that they have the freedom to then say whatever the fuck they want. And that's the other
no,
thing.
you have the freedom to say what you want, especially on Clown House.
No, but some people are willing to make that sacrifice of the self-deprecation to then abuse it, right? That's what I'm saying.
No. See, what I'm sure you heard, when I talk about low IQ, and then I'll often bring out, the smaller average Asian penis size all the time. So the point that I do that is that first of all, it's like, I'm not just attacking a certain group of people, right? What I'm saying is like, I'm just being consistent, right? We know that races are not equal, the Asian man average smaller penis size, as a matter of fact, right? Then I have that, how should I say, I wouldn't say ammunition, right? It brings me credibility when I say that, why is it so hard for us to accept that certain races are better at certain things and not so good at other things, right? Lower IQ in the black population in general. And that's why I do that. It's not that I want to like go out and be racist or anything. I'm just showing that I'm being consistent about what I'm saying and not being trying to be hateful to a particular group of people.
Yeah, but the problem here innately are that people are tribal, that people are self-interested and group-interested. No matter how much you try to prevent it from happening, even in America, that happened with political parties. It's just even when you try to get rid of like religion as the tribal violent factor, then they switched over to politics or hobbies or whatever the next thing will be. Even if you try to get rid of like, okay, from now on, no one will ever talk about politics in public spaces because we're just getting into fights and arguments. Then what? It's like, I don't know. Debate doesn't seem to be the answer.
Yeah, because it's a debate. It's you versus them. That's pretty hard, right?
Correct.
That's why
That's not
that's
a
why-
conversation. Exactly.
that's why I'm saying suggesting an internal dialogue, right? And that perhaps it would be less contentious.
No, it would
Perhaps.
be. And look, like if Jonathan Haidt is someone who was on the liberal side, and he actually went through that journey himself and began to understand and steelman conservative values. Okay, that's rare, is what I'm trying to explain to you. That level of introspection is extremely rare, and like someone like Jonathan Haidt, even though he's still like a centrist liberal, he is able to actually understand conservative concerns and understand that they're thinking more in the long term, whereas liberals are thinking about short-term rights, short-term freedom, short-term everything, short-term security, short-term freedom. He understands that conservatives think more in the long term, and he's able to steelman a lot of their arguments better. But to try to normalize that in the education level would require all the classical liberals to basically administrators, and their entire job was to do that. And they were not allowed to have children, couldn't own land, and they were just pure administrators. And this
Janissaries.
system worked out. Yeah, janissaries, exactly. This system worked so well until the janissaries got enough power and they said they wanted to have children. And once that was allowed to happen, the corruption became unbridled and the incentives were completely dislodged. The same thing happened in the Catholic Church, when the Catholic Church allowed priests to have children as well. They had served as their aristocratic, hermetic monks in the monasteries and church, who were not supposed to have long-term interest of their children and his generation and then his lineage. And they were able to be a lot more pragmatic, and also reasonable, and also less self-interested in their manners. The eunuchs are the Eastern version of this, right? To an extent. So, you know, to me, it's the unleashing of all this. We don't have any class. The problem in the West is that the right wing were destroyed philosophically in the 1800s. That's the problem. 17 and 1800s. And then practically that
But
policy
Gio,
with
look for example, look.
in the 1890s.
Gio, how do you explain Freemasonry then in the United States? Because it still exists. There's millions of Freemasons that are essentially still running on the same programming of the Freemasons, which is essentially.
Well, those were like the aristocratic groups that were supposed to, yeah, be in leadership positions, right? Like, because they are from good families that taught them how to be leaders and taught them how to be polymaths, and they had to go serve in the army. They were like Hamilton type of people. But then Americans were so suspicious and paranoid of that when George Washington, Hamilton, and a few of the officers decided to create the Order of Cincinnatus to teach future American officers how to be virtuous officers and how to be wise and read the classics and learn from all the mistakes of the Romans and Greeks. And all members of Congress on the Jeffersonian Hamilton side all hated this and said, "Oh, you guys are trying to make a secret party of the elite right now," you know? And it would have been nice to have that in a serious manner. Now it's in a shell manner where it's like just a club, but it was supposed to be an institution that George Washington and Hamilton were trying to introduce into America, and all the middle class and upper class called it like elitists. All the Jeffersonians and the pro-democracy type of more pro-democratic type of representatives, they all called that an elitist institution and told them you better not do that shit. And so they turned it into a social club.
Well,
and the
I mean,
conservatives don't have those mechanisms anymore of passing down, where conservative professors would teach them, like, look, these are the arguments from the left. You have to be careful from. We have the data to back this. Don't fall into this trap. Look at these studies and see what you think of it. We don't have that mentorship and passing down of that institutional knowledge down to the conservative intellectuals in all our institutions for the last 80, 90 years.
Well, let me ask you this question. Do you think the moral and virtuous decay of America essentially ended after the victory of World War II? Like, that's when essentially everything went downhill?
I would say, yeah, to a large degree, yeah. Because, and also, like, the suburbanization led to that, and, like, yeah, to a large degree. And it was supposed to be this new frontier project for the people. But, and look, I think suburbs could have worked if they weren't as wide as apart. And if you had suburbs of, like, themed suburbs, so an Irish Catholic upper class suburb, or an Irish Catholic middle class suburb, and then you had, like, a commonality, that would have been the best situation. But what you had was communities from within the city that were unified, all separated. So the Irish in New York City started moving to Long Island, other parts of the country, right, to the south. Italians moved to Long Island if they became middle class, and New Jersey if they became middle and upper class and working class, right? So when they moved out of the cities, they moved close. So you can see a lot of towns that have Italians, right? But the upper class, like,
and just to confirm that these are the people that currently have white guilt.
Yeah. And so, like, I grew up in a town dominated by Anglos, Italians, Irish, and Jews. Okay, and then we had a smattering of, like, maybe 1 or 2, 3 Indian kids per grade, and maybe 8, 9, 10 Asian, like East Asian kids, basically. And then the rest were like those four white groups, essentially, right? And we had like 12 churches in our town, 3,000 people, right? So everybody knew that each other were religious, at least, that they had good values, that they could, like, generally trust each other. And they were right. Like, the worst thing you could do was fight each other. Nothing like crazy. Um, but if you don't have that Anglo-Protestant culture to all enforce and be a part of and make that the norm, which is what allowed America to be successful. If we don't bring that back, then there is nothing. And honestly, I don't even think we can go back at this point. That's a problem. We have to think of a new identity, a new social norm, all the rituals, all the rationalization, and all the mysticism associated with these rituals, right? Like, for professors that retire university, there's a tradition where all the other professors, even ones you had beef with or didn't like, had political problems with or gossip drama with, every professor will bring a nice pen as a gift to you as a retirement present. So they're saying, look, when someone is a professor emeritus and he gets given this honor, he is so respectful that everyone must be respectful to him, regardless of your personal foibles, personal fights. That shows you that there is something greater than you that you're subservient to, right? And those kind of rituals bring meaning. It teaches people that humility, essentially. The lack of those rituals is also a huge problem. It's so many of these things, and it's like we can't rebuild it. The conservative rituals are gone from the 1930s and 40s and 50s, where you had great conservative intellectuals back then. That's gone. And all the conservatives are in the private sector now, or in entrepreneurs, right? Family businesses. They're the little league coach in their local town, right? But they're not at the federal level. They're not at the state level. Some of them are at, there are some. Of course, there are some, but not enough is the problem. Not enough is the problem. And I'm afraid of what rituals and traditions that liberals and progressives are going to make up. It's like kissing the feet of black people or something.
I mean, I have a hypothesis that like America's decline and their moral descent all basically started in 1946, and up until 2023, we have become a transgendered, cut off
So
little
that,
boy
and I
dick.
added the wealth factor, but then also the dishwasher, technology, AC, and also birth control, I think exponentially multiplied that also. Because now you had sexual freedom along
Yeah.
with economic freedom. Correct?
So I don't know if you saw this, but Phoebe Gates on Instagram now is saying that CVS will be carrying abortion pills, and so it's just so insane how our
Men
society.
are out of the question. Men are out of the decision of should they abort or not completely now. So if she feels like she's pregnant, she can just go in without telling her boyfriend or husband. She can just get an abortion, and it's all about her, right? So
Yeah, well,
there you go.
that's why I'm saying laws and big pharma and the bureaucracy and the culture and all these things matter in terms of communication. And Phoebe Gates, with her millions of followers, and her dad Bill, who's a vaccinologist murderer, all these people are death dealers, and it's just so bizarre that we live in a culture of this subversive death cult.
Well, it's just like I explained it to China Guy this way that we've made everybody merchants in America because it provides the most freedom as a class of people. So peasants are free because no matter who's in charge, they'll still own their land and they'll have and so they don't have to depend on whoever's in charge, let's say a king, right? And so if you look throughout history, most peasants are like, I don't care if the Normans rule over us, and I don't care if it's the Vikings, and I don't care if it's King Alfred the Great, right? So what happens is the merchants are more free than that because they're not tied down to a land like a peasant is where he needs to stay there. He's able to move around throughout the world, travel, explore. He can be a merchant.
So you're talking about the international Jew, the dilettante, the
well,
the
yeah,
dandy.
Protestants are just another version of that. Is exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, but the Protestants make the rationalization in the West for that to be the new reality, right? And the liberal philosophies allowed this to be allowed this to happen. So this is shouldn't have families telling you can't do anything. You can't. You shouldn't have countries or kings or priests telling your people what to do. And everyone should be able to make as many choices as they want. There should be no borders, right? Etc. Etc. But what's more, likely is that there might be one global religion, one government, right?
So
I'm trying
ba-
to tell America about that.
One thing that the Chinese have on America is 5,000 years of history and wisdom, right? And that's why the merchant class is ranked, right above the slave class, second lowest. And it will impose a lot of restrictions because the Chinese, since like 2,000 years ago, figured out that the merchant class often undermined the state.
Yes.
And both sides. And dude, I'm not a sinologist, but I was talking to a guy. Actually, I've known him for quite a while from Taiwan, actually, and he has a master's in sinology. Unfortunately, he doesn't speak fluent English. Otherwise, it would be great to have a in-depth discussion with him.
Oh yeah, I mean that might come in the future, right? With all this technology coming, there's gonna be like translators that we can use as a Bluetooth that we can hear the translation of like what's being said, on Clubhouse or in real life. So there's some of it that already exists in like a very prototype form, where it's just like Google Translate on a Raspberry Pi being misused.
yeah, but this is the whole thing of Tower of Babel. When there's one world,
Babel,
one world, one world language. It's already here though, Jew. It's called English.
But so yes, but then what that leads to is more fracturation as people want more individuality and localist particularity, where they want, no, this is my spirit and my ancestors. They have nothing to do with you over like fucking 3,000 miles away, right? So if you look at what happened in the 1850s, it was the age of empires, right? You had the Ottoman Empire, you had the British Empire, and the French Empire, right? And what you saw in the decades after that was like, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And what you saw was like Serbians saying, hey, we want our freedom. We want our local rule back. We want our sovereignty back, right? So that nation states, liberal nation states, were a reaction against empires and bigger threats around them, right? And what happened is they thought that if they did this, there wouldn't be empires in the future. But then this leads to alliances of nation states who are across different areas that lead to more regional and like you saw with the Triple Entente, the Russians siding with the British and the French against the Germans in the middle, bro. Right? That's scary to the Germans. Now they have enemies on both fronts, right? So you have that type of situation happening, right? And you have the UN, and you have all these alliances that form that actually turn it into bigger empires of coalitions of groups of nations who might as well be empires against other empires, right? So you have the ally versus the Axis, right? These are just two types of empires versus each other, and then you have the Cold War between America and Soviet Union is the same thing. So ironically, by trying to get rid of empires, we created an even bigger one, the United States Empire. And now, like, what do you do when Khalistanis want their freedom from India? They're just using the same argument that India used to create their own nation state, and that France used to create their own nation state, and that Poland used to create their own nation state. So there is no argument against nation state building from the liberal perspective. So liberals should be okay in supporting all these freedom movements, like evangelical Christians do, like Thomas Jefferson did, where he wanted more French revolutions all around the world. That's actually logical extension of liberalism from their perspective.
So yesterday, I was talking to this sinologist friend of mine from Taiwan, and I was asking him, right, because I have my own